passenger plane to crash shortly after takeoff with more than 240 people on board. AI171 was bound for London's Gatwick Airport, but rapidly lost altitude after takeoff, ultimately exploding on impact in a residential neighborhood and a building in India's northwestern city of Ahmedabad. Mark Martin joins us now. He's an aviation expert of many years, focusing on South Asia and in particular airlines like Air India. Mark, we appreciate this. Welcome to the program.
Hey, Anthony. Good afternoon. Thanks so much for having me. And I kind of hope we'd meet in more pleasant climes, but pretty unfortunate for what we've seen here in India with Air India.
There's no question about that. Based on the information that we do have, based on the images that you have seen and the aftermath, what did you take from this? What is your reaction?
Well, Anthony, what we know so far, and from the video, from all that we've seen so far, is that he took off with about 255 passengers on board, full fuel, full load. We noticed he climbed up to about 500 feet, and typically that's when you're supposed to continue climb with your continuous thrust or takeoff thrust. And from what we know so far is that he didn't have that thrust. Now, we're not sure why, whether it was an engine failure or it was a bird strike. I mean, bird strike doesn't really occur that low, but in Ahmedabad, that's an airport which is very susceptible to bird strike at about 5,000 feet. What we know is that he pitched up really hard to try and escape and get away from collision, but that was a bad idea. He should have pitched his nose down, got some speed, and maybe got out of that spot and try to crash land somewhere else or bring the aircraft down safe. But I think it's not right that we speculate. We've just lost 250 people on board. The pilot's dead. Let's respect the dead and the deceased. This is going to be, or rather, this has to be a global investigation, because the 787 Dreamliner, the 8-9, flies over with Air Canada, the U.S., British Airways, Qantas, and a whole lot of airlines across the world. So this investigation is going to be a global affair, because we need to know why on earth did that aircraft stall the way it did, and why did it fall from the sky? And it's very relevant and imperative that collectively this gets investigated, because we don't ever have this sort of a crash ever happen again.
Of course, so many questions, and that is part of the investigation as they try to understand what may have led to this. Focusing on and expanding on what you mentioned about the Boeing 787, this is the Dreamliner. Expand on what more you know about this. You mentioned it's utilized by so many airlines, including Air Canada. Just recently, in fact, it celebrated its billionth passenger, so it's obviously well used around the world. It's never had an accident before of this degree, as I understand, correct?
Oh yeah, Anthony, the 787 is a next generation, fifth generation plus aircraft. It's a complete digital aircraft. It's got fiber optics on board. It's got the best of the cleanest safety record. I mean, sure, there have been incidents of groundings and maintenance and part failures and so on, but the aircraft has been overall extremely reliable. And this is one of the newest aircraft out there. Even Air India, we operated this aircraft after 2011. So it's a new aircraft as part of our fleet, and we just have two aircraft out there which are the newest: the Airbus A350 and the 787. And this aircraft is been superlative in performance, range. It's also got the advanced GE Gen X engines, which gives it its outstanding thrust and power. I think something clearly has gone wrong here. I think what's important is we got to be very clear that this is Air India, okay? And for the last 20 years, Air India was always criticized for being a government-run airline and a government organization with unions and so on. Well, guess what? We privatized Air India 4 years ago and gave it over to Singapore Airlines and Tata's. And to see an incident like this, with Singapore Airlines and the Tatas in the driving seat is ridiculous and nuts. And God forbid, if it turns out that this is because of a maintenance problem, then their heads are going to roll, because for to see something, this is possibly the worst air disaster in 30 years. The last time we saw something like this was possibly 9/11, when an aircraft was used as a terror weapon. Okay. Even, with Sully Sullenberger and US Airways, and, he also had an opportunity to land on the Hudson. So, and he was at 4,000 feet. This is, a stall at 500 feet. The pilot has no way of recovering, least of all trying to figure an option to save himself. And never in the history of aviation has anything like this ever happened. And this is possibly, like I said, the worst air disaster in 30 years. And this investigation, Anthony, is going to be a global affair. We've got the NTSB on board already. We're going to get the European Aviation Safety Agency coming in next week, the UK CAA, Transport Canada. Every regulator is going to be part of this. And I'm hoping that this investigation is independent, unbiased, because we can't have something like this ever happen again. And if it turns out that it was a private ownership airline that was cutting corners with maintenance, then I mean, this is going to be, it's going to, it's going to, blow the roof apart, especially with the political system in India as well, because Ahmedabad is in the state of Gujarat, and that's where the Indian Prime Minister is from. That's his city. That's where he started his political career. And the folks who passed away are from his own state. So everybody now is on tenterhooks. We're treading on thin ice. I'm hoping that we get started with this investigation as soon as possible. It's madness over here, Anthony, with the press. Everybody's speculating in India, and you got channels, with wild card ideas of what happened and what went wrong. I urge everybody to please not speculate. Let's respect the dead. Let's investigate this. Everyone's mourning, a loved one at the moment. And the more we speculate, the more we're influencing that investigation. And that investigation needs to be done with a frank and a clear, open mind.
Can I ask you a question on that investigation? We don't have a lot of time, but are there worries that the investigation itself could become politicized, given the fact that it is Air India, given the fact that there was a politician on board as well, given the fact that there is incredible international attention, given the diversity of countries represented on that airline as well, on that specific plane? How concerned are you on that question?
Well, the keys to the car of this investigation is not going to be with the Indian DGCA or the AIB in India. It's going to be with, like I said, Transport Canada, NTSB, FAA, European Aviation Safety Agency, and several global organizations that will get involved with this. And the reason they do that is because this is the first ever 787-8 crash ever. Okay. And I think there's going to be, in my personal view, there's going to be a tremendous amount of independence, and there's going to be a tremendous amount of isolated view when it comes to investigating this crash. Because if the FAA and the NTSB are not going to take it lying down if this is going to be skewed in a particular political direction. And I'm really glad that's going to happen, because those are possibly the only safeguards that will ensure a fair, clean, and a just investigation process.
Mark, we discussed the 787 Dreamliner. It never had an accident of this magnitude. However, Boeing itself has been under the microscope, of course. What does this mean for them and, of course, their reputation?
Well, Boeing has been having it pretty rough for the last 5 years after the two 737 Maxes crashed, and with the FAA audit on Boeing. And, let's be honest, Boeing's production lines are shut down by the FAA. They're not producing any more 787s. The 777X is pretty much virtually grounded. 737 Max production line is halted. So Boeing already is in the negative, and this is going to really add a lot more to what Boeing is, Boeing has gone through and will go through. I know Kelly Ortberg is yeah, pretty is mighty pleased that he's just got some good aircraft orders from the Middle East. But that really doesn't hold good unless you get the aircraft off your production line and hand the keys to the new customer. So for Boeing, I mean, the stock took a 10 to 12% hit this morning in morning trade, and it's going to be pretty rough for Boeing. And while all said and done, now all granted, Boeing did make a good aircraft of the 787. Okay, and I think the investigation in some way should help Boeing, exonerate Boeing to some extent, but also hold them accountable. Accountable. The greater accountability with this crash, I think, is going to be with Air India, Singapore Airlines, and the Tatas, which own Air India.
Okay, we appreciate your time and your insight very much. In fact, that is Mark Martin, founder and CEO of Martin Consulting, joining us from New Delhi. Thank you again, sir.
Thanks, Anthony. Thanks for having me.